The dawn gathered itself like silk along the crenellations of the Red Keep, a pale wash of color slowly coaxing detail from stone and shadow. Cersei stood where she often stood at that hour, gloved hands on cold merlons, hair bound beneath a net of gold wire so the wind could not tease it loose. The city lay below in its layered ugliness and need, roofs patched with old sails and new thatch, lanes knitted with smoke, 1,000 hearths struggling against the bite of a winter whose breath had finally reached King's Landing. To the east, the Blackwater glittered in thin plates, the tide ebbing to expose black weed and the ribs of the city's ancient piers, and farther out she could just make out the outer fleet at anchor, low, blunt silhouettes, like beasts at rest. She had sent for wine but did not touch it, letting the cup warm against her palm. The cup had been her mother's, worked with lions, the handles shaped into paws that pressed against her skin. She drank rarely at dawn now. Wine belonged to dusk and the kindling of torches. Morning was for the calculus of survival. The cold made the air more honest. It cleared the last cloying hints of the perfumer's practice from her chamber and put a knife's edge in her thoughts. The ravens had come in the night. One from the Trident, telling of caravans turned back by snow at the neck. One from the Reach, offering less grain than last winter. 3 from her own spies who wrote in the ink of careful euphemism that winter had woken the dead in the far north and given them the patience of slow fire. She had known of this for years through rumor and for months through proof. Jon Snow and his queenling had paraded a corpse before her, a snarling puppet that refused to die. Men could be deceived by spectacle. She had not been. She had seen past the frost-cracked skin and rime of the creature's hair to the living breath steaming in the mouths of her enemies. The evidence had been real enough. She had believed it then, and she believed it now, and it did not move her. Threats had to be weighed not by their size, but by the hands that held them. Cersei turned the cup in her palm and glanced down at the small movements that made a city seem alive. A baker's boy breaking the crust on a mountain of cooling bread. The wharfside men untangling lines. A woman dumping a pail of slops into the alley and shivering as the wind raised gooseflesh on her forearm. Winter was a god to the distant lords, a story of honor and walls. To her people it would be a crust to break, a line to untangle, a pail to empty and fill again. They would worship whatever deity brought them food and heat. She intended it to be her. "Your Grace," Qyburn said softly from behind her. He appeared at her elbow as if the stone had exhaled him. "He is within the harbor. The flagship is most distinctive." "The name is the Silence," Cersei said, as much to the wind as to him. "We will not use it in public." "As you command." Qyburn made a polite angle of his head, his eyes pale as candle fat. "Shall I send the signal to open the inner boom and raise the array along the walls?" "Raise it," she said. "Let him walk in under the mouths of our scorpions. It will remind him of what his laughter cannot drown. Send men to the Great Hall. I want the Lords present. The city must learn what it is today." "What it is," Qyburn repeated, as if tasting a new tincture. "A wedding, Your Grace. Few learn without the lash or a song." "Songs end," Cersei said. "A lash can teach again." Qyburn bowed a fraction deeper and slipped away. Alone again, Cersei lifted the cup and finally drank. The wine had gone tepid and flat, but she swallowed it anyway. In its exhausted warmth, she felt the shape of her morning resolve harden. The ravens had come, and so had she. Winter and dead men, dragon queens and wolf kings, broken oaths and old prophecies. All of it had come in one long sequence like the creak of a too-old chair. She had learned to sit perfectly still so it would not throw her. The masts of the oncoming fleet rose above the morning haze with an indecent grace, like spears grown from black coral. Even at this distance, the Silence looked unlike other ships. It seemed to absorb light. The painted eyes at its prow were blind, the carved kraken head twisted in a scream that had no tongue. The crew moved with the unnatural symmetry of men who had learned to speak with gestures. The rumor at court was that he had cut out their tongues. There were other rumors, some with darker roots. Cersei did not care whether he had crippled their mouths or their minds. He had mastered them, and that mattered. She had considered, at first, whether it had to be him. But among all the men who brought her coins and promises and averted eyes, only Euron Greyjoy had brought her heir. He had stepped into her presence as if opening a door no one else could see, letting into her chamber the smell of pitch and open water and iron and wind and danger. He was a bad man. He enjoyed being one as if it conferred a title. Many men were bad in her experience, but most lacked the courage to say it aloud. He would say it in the yard, before the guards, while eating an orange with a little knife and letting the juice run down his wrist. The honesty had made the lies easier to read. He had asked for her hand the way men offer a challenge, with a smile that said he would wrestle her for it. It had offended her and pleased her. She had told him no and watched his eyes. When he had not flinched, she told him later, and not on his terms. That had been the night before last. Now the morning had hands. She turned and crossed the battlements, her cloak trailing, the cold air combing its black velvet nap until the stitches gleamed like water-wet slate. The guards stepped aside with the solemn clumsiness of men suddenly aware of their armor. In the corridor, an old woman in a rough shawl curtsied and kept her eyes on the rushes, lips moving as if in prayer. Cersei paused for the barest moment and touched the woman's shoulder. The flinch traveled the length of the bent spine. The queen continued on and smiled thinly to herself. The fear was tonic. In the great hall, the servants had already set the trestles with trenchers and salt bowls and the pitchers she had ordered. Wine for the lords and water for the men she could replace. The floor had been washed. Light pooled beneath the high windows, making the moats turn like slow snow. The iron throne sat crouched at the far end, its iron a darker darkness in the shadow of the dais. Cersei did not look at it as she entered. She savored the habit of not needing to look. Jaime stood near the base of the dais with a small knot of Kingsguard, his white cloak bright as a gull against the red carpet. She saw his face before he turned, knew where the muscle would jump in his jaw, knew too the bitterness that would bloom in his throat because she had planted it there. He looked at her and did not smile. He smiled the way a man does in a dream where his teeth are loose. "You sent for the lords," he said. His voice was hoarse. He hadn't slept. She could taste that the way she could taste smoke in a room gone still after a fire. "They are gathering. They will witness the morning," she said. "And remember how it began. Have you eaten?" He looked at the table as if he could not place it.
"No."
"Eat," she said. "You will need strength to look strong." His mouth tightened. On another day, another year. He might have said her name with the old tenderness and accused her with the old certainty, and they would have worn the accusation together. He had brought her children. He had brought her pride. He had brought her belief that the boy she had loved in the Lichyard could be made into a form of justice. But the children were dead, and belief is a coin with an edge. He watched her with those lion eyes that had once made her want to set the world alight just to see the reflection in them. Now the reflection showed a colder fire. "What would you have me be, then?" he asked. "A statue in armor? Or a husband in waiting?" "Husbands wait," Cersei said. "Statues serve to be looked at. Be a sword, Jaime. Swords are simple." He massaged the gold of his hand with his good thumb as if to warm it into life. "Have you decided when to tell the city?" "The bells will tell them." She let a pause hang delicate as an earring. "We will sound them at noon and at dusk. By night there will be songs." "For whom?" he asked. "For the living," she said. "You and I do not owe the dead more than we have given." The doors at the far end of the hall swung open. A gust of sea air spilled in, cold and tasting of tar. Euron Greyjoy came down the center of the hall as if he had always been meant to cross it. He wore black that had been polished into something like the surface of a looking-glass, boots that did not leave noise on the floor, and a smile that would have been beautiful on anyone else. He had braided his hair away from his face and tied it with a strip of crimson cloth, and the crimson made his eyes too blue. His cloak was fastened with a brooch shaped like a kraken with a ruby in its mouth. He stopped at the base of the dais and bowed a fraction lower than custom demanded. His gaze flicked to Jaime, to the white cloak, bounced from it as if from a toy that had lost its taste, and returned to the queen. "Your Grace," he said, You shine. I brought better weather, as promised. The wind had sharpened as if to spite him. She did not smile. You brought wind, Lord Greyjoy. We have walls. Walls are useful, he said. They keep the wind from taking what you want to keep. They only fail when you mistake what they're for. He turned his wrist. The sunlight from the nearest window bent and ran along the curve of his blade like water. Shall we speak of vows? Or gifts first? I confess, in the matter of sequence, I am a child. The sea gives you everything at once. Gifts, she said. The city learns by watching men place things in my hands. He clapped softly, then snapped his fingers. 2 of his men entered bearing a long chest between them. The hinges were cunningly wrought. The wood seemed sealed with pitch. Salt crystals clung white to the iron bands. They set it down and withdrew, their eyes downcast. Euron lifted the lid and stood back, as if he too were curious what the sea had decided to give this time. Within, wrapped in oiled linen, lay a scorpion bolt like the ones Qyburn had commissioned, longer than a man, its head barbed and wicked, the metal blackened and etched with a pattern so fine it looked like frost. Euron handled it with unexpected gentleness, like a fisherman showing the child of a friend the first catch of spring. Qyburn, Cersei said. He had been hovering at the edge of the scene like an annotation and now stepped into the text. He reached out, did not touch it, withdrew, and finally, with the careful greed of a physician lifting a sheet from a corpse, he let his fingers travel the etching. Unusual metallurgy, he murmured. And these marks are a language, Euron said. From a city that doesn't exist unless you count books as cities. My brother liked books. When he fell from a bridge, most of his library fell with him. This one I kept. He tapped the shaft. It asks a question of the air. It is not polite. The air will answer loudly. Qyburn looked as if he had tasted something sweet that might be poison. Will we be allowed to test it? Of course, Euron said. But not in the city, unless you'd like to see how well your walls do when the air answers loudly. I brought other gifts. I brought a promise. And I brought my hands. He lifted them, palms out. They were scarred in the way sailors' hands are scarred, with nicks like punctuation. Cersei found that she was watching his wrists. The tendons held the light. You brought a promise, she said. Others have brought me those. They snap. So do necks, he said with friendly brightness. But a promise tied to a wedding is a different knot. I propose to knot ourselves together before noon. At dusk we may test the air. Tonight we can teach the city a song that will serve it in the dark. The lords shifted, a murmur like silk being folded. The word itself moved among them like a small animal. Wedding. Prodding bellies that had digested too many intrigues and too few certainties. Cersei let her gaze travel the faces she owned or would own. Rosby with his winter cough. Lord Kenning, whose sons she had sent to the gold cloaks and whose loyalty she measured in the weight of their new armor. The Tyrell remnant, sour as lemon rinds, their vintage gone. A pair of lesser river lords sniffing after what plunder her men had prized from the field of fire reborn. Men who would clap for anything if the clapping did not hurt their hands. She found, as she had expected to find, a hunger in them. Men always hungered for the permission to believe that what was happening to them was purposeful. Weddings bestowed permission. It was one of their uses, like binding houses and legitimizing bastards and making corpses in bed. Before noon, Cersei said. She turned to the hall. We will wed in the Red Keep. The city will dine at my expense. There will be wine. Lord Euron Greyjoy joins his house to mine, and with it his fleet. The Iron Bank will find its silver doubled by spring. Our enemies will find the wind unfriendly when they look south. They cheered. It rose in the hall like a storm that had learned to sing. Jaime did not move. Euron turned his head and watched the cheering roll around the room as if studying a new species of fish. Your Grace, he said when it quieted enough for his voice to rest upon it. Shall I fetch my prisoner? Some men give brides elephants. In a pinch, a sister of your enemies has a trunk of its own. But perhaps you would rather her silence be kept below. There is a certain poetry in letting her hear the bells without seeing why. Cersei felt a tiny, precise movement under her breastbone. The old thrill, the one that comes when a blade has been driven exactly where it ought to be and the other person realizes too late that they are already dead. Yara Greyjoy was in the black cells. Cersei had not visited her. Euron had shown her once, laughing in the lantern light, the way his niece lifted her chin even with blood in her hair. Cersei had appreciated the economy of it, a symbol with no upkeep. "She will remain below," Cersei said. "The city would eat her, and I prefer a tame hunger." "As you wish," Euron spread his hands. "Then I will bring my priest." "You have one. From my islands?" "Many. From elsewhere." His smile deepened, not with warmth. "I like the gods that live inside men's mouths. They are easier to feed. But for the city I brought a proper man with proper prayers that smell of smoke and grief and enough hope to make the rest go down. He will say what needs saying, and we will say the rest without him." He bowed again and withdrew, Qyburn falling in at his shoulder like a shadow that had decided to grow flesh and counsel. Jaime's gaze tracked them with the impersonal interest a falcon gives a dog. When they were gone, he came up 2 steps of the dais and stopped. The white cloak dragged. He did not pick it up. "You mean to do it," he said. She slipped her hands out of her gloves and set them on the arm of her chair. The iron smelled faintly of old blood. "Ido. You mean to be his wife." "The word is queen," she said, amused despite herself. "You of all men know how lightly wife sits on me." He glanced at the throne as if expecting it to answer. "He will use you." "I will use him," she said. "We will use each other. I prefer honest arrangements." "Honest," he repeated. "Is that what we are now? Honest. We have always been honest, Jaime. Only the content changes." He flinched then, a small thing visible only because she knew his body as well as she knew her own. "When they call you his queen, what will I be?" "What you have been," she said, and felt the precision of the cruelty and did not blunt it. "My brother, my sword, my memory." He went very still. The muscles in his neck did a small, confused dance. Then he bowed, a legal motion perfectly measured. "As you command, your grace." He left with the Kingsguard, white fading into red stone. Cersei watched him go and let the thin wire of pain that had strung itself through her chest vibrate until it sang itself out. There was work. The wedding itself took place in the Queen's September because the Great One was gone. The ruin of the September of Baelor still leached greenish whispers into the wind on certain nights, or so the washerwomen claimed. Cersei did not enter that part of the city. The Queen's September smelled of beeswax and old stone and wool. Cersei had had the floor scrubbed until the servants' fingers bled. She wore black like polished obsidian, with threads of gold that caught at the light like fish. Her bodice was high, her sleeves narrow. At her throat Qyburn had fastened a collar of interlocked plates of gold like the overlapping edges of shields. She had chosen no veil. She did not conceal. Euron had washed and trimmed and made himself into something like a lord. The effect was unsettling, like seeing a wild cat decide to sit in a chair. He wore a doublet of sea silk dyed so dark it drank light and returned it as a sheen. The kraken brooch glowed at his throat. His eyes were very clear. He moved with the careful leisure of a man who enjoys knowing how watched he is. The priest spoke, and they repeated, and the bells took the words into the city. Euron slipped the ring onto her finger. It was heavy, a circle of worked iron with a strip of gold braided within it. Iron and gold pleased her. When it came time to kiss, Euron took her face in his hands, and for an instant she felt the old panic of being touched in public. She gripped his wrists until the bones spoke to her palms and made herself lean into the thing, mouth to mouth, each of them holding the kiss like an instrument they had played long ago and could still make music of. That night, the city was full of torches. The river had its own lit necklace. It might have been summer if not for the knife in the wind. The small folk ate and drank and danced until they remembered that dancing in winter makes more hunger. In the Red Keep, the great hearth roared and the hall filled with the aromas of beef and cinnamon and cloves, the kind of abundance that makes men believe an avalanche can be stopped by commanding it. Euron sat at her right and told stories in his laughing, tireless way, Towns where the dogs were smarter than their masters. An island made entirely of skulls. A priest who could set fish on fire by looking at them and had been burned for it. Sailors who had taken wives from the sea and then learned salt wives are not for kitchens. He knew how to pace a tale so that laughter came when wine had found the right veins. She let him perform for her and the court and listened to the noise within herself, mapping its currents. He flirted with her as one flatters the day when one means to sail, as if she were weather. He did not do it with the fawning that makes interruption necessary. He did it with the charm of someone who knows exactly where the cliff is and intends to show you the view. In the space between courses, he leaned close enough that she could smell the salt and the faint metallic tang that clung to him as if he had been counting coins. "Do you know why your walls look so well by torchlight?" he asked. "Why?" she said, tilting her head so that his low voice would not force her to lean in. "Because fire deceives distance," he said. "It makes the far close. A trick sailors use. I was thinking of the north. I would be interested to know if their walls are as handsome by night." "You propose to go north," she said. "Most men prefer going south in winter. I propose to set my ships where the sea will be a scythe if the stalks break free," he said. "The dead are said not to swim. If they seek to cross the neck, the river mouths will be their throats. I can be the stone in those throats. Or the knife. I have knives." "And if dragons fly?" she asked. He grinned, showing teeth as white and sharp as if he honed them. "Then we will learn if the air answers loudly to the questions I intend to ask it. Your Qyburn is a good student. He listens to new dialects without insisting the old ones are better. I will need men and timber to build more scorpions. And I will need the space by the water." "You shall have it," she said. "Take the old netters' sheds. If they complain, give them the honor of their own warmth and burn their sheds to keep them from the cold. The work matters." He made a pleased sound in his throat. "It does. And I will send a small gift north. If the wolves and the dragon want to learn that my marriage improves the weather here, let us send them a gale. Small ships, fast, will bite at their harbors, take their fish, burn their stores on the beach. Rats learn by hunger. Kings are rats with banners. Leave the banners to me," she said. "If they send a raven to ask our help, I will send back a feather." He laughed aloud, genuine delight flashing. "Oh, you are the right wife for me." The hall took the laugh as license. The musicians found a livelier measure. A minor lord who had been watching them with earnest hunger told a joke that involved a pig and a septa, and the audience groaned and then brayed anyway. Cersei let it run. Let them believe that winter could be mastered the way a feast could be cut. By carving the first piece with confidence. Later, when the roast had been reduced to bones and hands and the musicians had grown hoarse and men had begun to forget their chairs and lie under the table like contented dogs, she walked with Euron to the terrace above the gardens. The night had grown crueler. The stars felt like grit. The river hissed when the wind pressed it against its banks. Down below, the royal gardeners had left the lemon trees wrapped in straw and oiled rags. The wrappings rustled like something alive trying to be silent. "You did well," Euron said softly, the performance muted at last. "You wear the night like a cloak. Some queens wear daylight until it blinds them. Night is better for knives. And for pleasure." She looked at him the way a falcon looks at a hill, to see what might be living under it. "If you want me frightened, you will need finer tools." "I want you not bored," he said. "Boredom destroys quicker than knives. My father died of boredom." They pushed him off a bridge and called it the Drowned God. "I suspect boredom had drowned him long before." "You think of your father often," she said. "So do other children who grew up under men who wanted to be gods." She turned her hands on the terrace rail. The iron felt warm from the heat of the hall. It cooled in her grip like a living thing that did not want to please her. "My father is dead, and I am not bored. That is the order that matters." Euron leaned his elbows on the rail beside her, their shoulders not touching. "Do you love anyone, Cersei?" It was an indecent question, elegantly phrased. She considered it the way she would consider a sudden change in wind. "I loved my children," she said. That is a correct answer, he said. But I asked a different question. She let herself look out at the water until her breath no longer showed itself when she exhaled. I love victory. He made a small, appreciative murmur. So do I, and I love its smell. It smells like fear in other people's mouths. And you? She said. Do you love anyone? No, he said cheerfully. But I love anything that loves me, and I like to encourage things to try. He straightened. I will leave before dawn, he said. If I go quietly, the city will imagine a dozen reasons and choose the one that pleases it most. Do I have your leave to take 300 men and as many carpenters as can count to 10? And your Qyburn for an afternoon, to whisper to the wood. You have my leave, she said. You have more than that. You have the name my marriage gives you. Use it as a shield or a knife as you please. Return with proofs. The city will be hungry again by then. He bowed, a smaller bow than in the morning. Felt less like courtesy and more like acknowledgement. Until the air answers, he said, and was gone into the warmed, loud dark. She remained a while longer, thinking of the bells that still quivered in the towers, the sound not yet done traveling through the night. The prophecy ran under her thoughts like a seam of iron. The Valonqar, the younger brother, hands about her pale white throat. She had learned to make of prophecy not a cage but a map. Sometimes maps warned of swamps where no road could be built. Sometimes they suggested bridges. Euron Greyjoy was a younger brother. So was Jaime. So were more men than not in any hall at any time. She turned her neck in her collar and felt its weight, a gold substitute for hands. If the hands came, she would have taught them to be hers first. She slept in a bed warmed by coals and by a fire she did not have to tend, and at some far hour in the night she woke to the sense of something altered, as if the river had changed direction. She pushed the coverlet back, rose, crossed to the window, and lifted the panel. The cold slapped her. The harbor lay quiet and black and seeing as if it had grown an eye. She stood a long time, in her shift and her bare feet, until she could not tell whether the shaking in her legs was cold or some older tremor. Then she closed the window and returned to bed and dreamed of walking barefoot over a map until her Sauls knew every road. Jaime, in his own chamber, did not sleep at all. He sat with his white cloak over his shoulders like snow on a wounded tree and held the white book open to a page that had not yet been written on. He could not help thinking of hands. He could not help thinking of the one he still had and the one he had given. He could not help thinking of Cersei's mouth, slick with wine, forming the word queen to mean wife and not him. He realized with a certain tired astonishment that he could leave. He could rise, put on leather and wool and the gold hand like a joke he had learned to tell, and ride north into a winter where men would not know his face and would not know his sins unless he told them. He could tell them nothing and still be himself. He rose at dawn and did not tell anyone. He went to the stables and saddled his horse. Bronn materialized as if conjured by the smell of departure. "Leaving your own wedding feast already?" Bronn said, amused, no malice, the man's calculation made friendly by habit. "It wasn't mine," Jaime said, and swung into the saddle. "You'll freeze," Bronn said. "I've been colder," Jaime said. "Once I held the rock of Casterly in my hand and felt nothing. This will be easier." Bronn studied him a moment, something like pity, something like respect. "If you find a place where men keep their word north of the neck, send a raven. I'll retire there." "If I find one," Jaime said, "I may retire too." He touched his heels to his horse and left. Qyburn watched him go from a window that had once looked out on a garden and now looked out on a yard full of timbers and men. He made a note in his head where he filed the movements of men as one files the experiments of rats. Euron had already taken over the netters' sheds, and the work was proceeding with the beautiful ferocity of a problem that men believe can be solved with sufficient sweat. Qyburn liked such problems. They rarely resisted for long when properly humored. He had 4 models of the new scorpions in various stages, 2 built to throw ordinary bolts at ordinary speeds, good for breeding confidence in the crew, and 2 for the new bolt. He did not think the etched marks were magic. Magic was a word men used when they lacked enough words. The alloy was unusual. The barbs had a foul intelligence. The shaft was banded with something like bone. There were things that books, when burned, leave behind in the minds of the men who burned them, and those things sometimes found their way into metal. He did not fear it. He had loved fear once. Now he preferred a clear table, clean tools, and men who did not flinch when told to hold. Euron joined him in the yard as if the smell of metal had drawn him. He moved through men with that odd courtesy he wore when he wanted to be obeyed without making obedience feel like defeat. "How far?" Euron asked. Qyburn gestured to the long frame. "Far enough to make the first test worthwhile. We will never achieve parity with a dragon's speed. That was never the point. Dragons are arrogant. They believe the sky excuses geometry. Our advantage is in their belief." Euron laughed under his breath. "Words that smell of ink. I like you, gray bird. You speak like a map, but you draw like a knife." "We will need a target," Qyburn said. "Not a ship, a moving thing in the air. We can use kites. We can use dead pigs if we must." "Use a kite," Euron said. "Dead pigs are too proud to fly. Afterward we will try the loud question. Not today. I want the city to have learned one song before I play them another." He left as he had come, the wake of his passage leaving in its place a small, alert silence. Qyburn returned to his measurements. He had the distinct and not unpleasant sense of being part of a machine that did not yet know its own name. News traveled north as a crow travels, odd in its angles, late where it ought to be early, early where it ought to be late. At Winterfell, when the raven came, the yard was full of steam from the horses and men went about with cheeks raw from wind and the smell of iron in everything. Sansa took the message in the great hall, fingers warm from the cup she had been holding, and read it twice. The first time the words were nonsense, a kind of rhyme. Marriage, bells, fleet, queen. The second time they made a picture that was almost funny if not for the winter pressing at the walls. She sat with it a long moment, thinking of the girl she had been who had dreamed of queens in stories and found knives under the satin. Arya came by and lifted an eyebrow without asking, her hair loose and rough around her face like a pelt. Sansa handed her the message. Arya read it and made a sound that could have been a laugh if it had held more warmth. "Good," Arya said. "Two snakes curled together keep each other busy." "Snakes," Sansa said. "And the sea. We will need to warn White Harbor." "Davos will already have guessed," Arya said. "He thinks the way men do who have had to count their own fingers." She put the message down. "Will you tell Jon?" "Daenerys," Sansa said, with the clean emptiness of a plate when the bread is gone. "Both. We will need them to agree on the shape of their fear so we can do anything useful." Arya grinned without amusement. "You ask men to agree on fear. Easier to ask them to agree on pride." "I'm not asking," Sansa said. "I will tell them. The difference is small, but it matters if you do it with enough calm." "And do we?" Arya asked, a glint of mischief briefly stitching itself into her eyes. "Have enough calm?" Sansa thought of bells ringing in a city that smelled of cloves and blood and men cutting new teeth on promises. "We have winter," she said. "It supplies calm as needed." Jon came in from the yard with snow strung in his hair like salt and took the message without asking for words first. He read, closed his eyes briefly, and then read again. "She's married him now," he said. "Yes," Sansa said. "We always knew she would or might as well have. This just makes it honest." Daenerys stood beside the hearth, its fire a polite animal compared to the dragons she commanded. She watched Jon with the concentration of someone reading a language she had learned too late and had once thought she would not need. "Marriage makes people honest, at least in public," she said. "The rest is the same. Her fleet is his fleet. The Iron Bank will answer when she calls. That much I knew. Now the songs in the streets of King's Landing will make men brave who should be cautious. We will have to count our grain again," Sansa said, practical, not unkind. "A wedding means a feast. A feast means a hungry week after. Hungry bellies make men lie more easily to their wives and to their lords. If the Greyjoys bite our coastline while the dead bite our east, we will have to decide which teeth to break first." Tyrion, who had been pouring wine he was not sure he wanted, set the flagon down. He had not flinched at the word wedding. He flinched now carefully at the word teeth. "Euron will not send his whole fleet north," he said. "He is not patient enough for siege. He is an arsonist with boats. He will set little fires and watch us stamp on them and feel clever. Cersei will praise his cleverness and set men with ledgers to count how much we have burned. If I were still her hand, I would advise exactly this and be rewarded with a new coat." "Then we cannot stamp," Daenerys said. "We must step where the fire will not catch us." She looked to Jon and to Sansa. "You are the North. Tell me what the North needs, not what it fears." Sansa smoothed the parchment, thinking of ships appearing in fog, men with hooks, the quiet ruin of empty nets. "We need to pull the fishing families from the dangerous coves and bring them inland before they starve from the loss of their own boats. That will make more hungry mouths behind our walls. We will need to take grain from men who have more than they should and give it to men who will starve only once before dying and will not be useful after. We will need to send ravens to White Harbor and Barrowton and the Rills and count steps like a thief climbing stairs at night, quietly and with good breath." Jon nodded. "I will ride to the last hearth," he said. "If the dead are there, we'll be late and we'll have to buy time with men. If they are not, we will make haste and pray it was not wasted bread." He turned to Daenerys. "Keep the dragons ready. Don't give them to the water. It favors our enemies now." Her mouth tightened. Pride does not enjoy being called enemy by the sea when it is used to owning the sky. "I will not," she said. "I will not give anything to the sea that the land can use." Tyrion lifted the flagon again and poured his cup and did not drink, because he suddenly did not trust the idea of drink as much as he once had. "Cersei marries," he said conversationally, as if to a friend he had found sitting with him in a cell. "And the world turns. It turns toward the dark, as worlds do in winter." He looked at Sansa, then at Jon, then at Daenerys. "The thing about dark is that it makes men look the same until they speak. That can be useful for a time." "We will make it useful," Sansa said. "It is what people do when they cannot afford principle." She folded the message and put it in her sleeve. She would read it again later in private and weigh the tiny barbs of certain words that had been chosen to prick. She did not intend to bleed. At sea, Euron sailed with 300 men and 36 carpenters and a smaller priest than the one who had married him. This priest had pale hands and eyes that looked at the horizon as if it might be convinced to move. Euron set him to blessing the wood and did not listen to the words. The wind at their backs was cold enough to crack a man's lips and make his ears burn. Euron's laughter cracked nothing. He laughed like a boy stealing summer fruit and finding more fruit than he had hands for. At night he dreamed and woke and dreamed again, and sometimes his dreams walked over into the waking world as if the line had been washed out by a tide. In one dream he stood on the deck of the Silence and looked up at a sky full of eyes. They blinked, each in its own time, 1,000 eyelids closing in different rhythms until rhythm itself seemed like a lie. When he woke he found that he had been biting his knuckles. He licked the blood from them and smiled. The sea had spoken. It always did to men who listened. Hells and gods were land problems. The sea did not threaten men with forever. It threatened them with now. They made White Harbor in 10 days and did not enter it. They sat outside and watched it. A faster ship ran in by night and ran out by dawn with 2 boats ablaze behind her like candles made for mockery. Then they went north and did the same to a village whose name no one in the crew had bothered to learn and whose houses had been built with a patience that Euron admired briefly before he burned it. He sent a raven with a letter for Cersei written in a hand that had grown more careful under the eyes of a slight priest. The letter was brief. Said, "The heir will answer soon. Hold the city in a song." He attached to the letter a small wooden carving that one of the carpenters had whittled in his sleep. A snake curled around a fish. He did not know why he had done that. He did not make a habit of caring why. He put the bird up and watched it go, a black needle sewing itself into a gray cloth. In King's Landing the carpenters pounded and Qyburn measured, and work song and threat kept time. Cersei took her meals publicly twice a day, once with the lords and once with the captains of the gold cloaks, and drank from the cup before they did and laughed at their jokes and stared, unblinking, when they tried to look into her eyes. She moved through the keep with the calm of a river whose banks had been raised by engineers, and she made decisions the way surgeons cut. Swiftly, with cleaning afterward as part of the act. She went down to the black cells once. Yara Greyjoy sat on the floor with her back to the wall and her knees drawn up. She had the face of someone whose body had learned to spend itself carefully. She looked up when Cersei entered and did not rise. Cersei did not comment on the discourtesy. She liked to be offered courtesies she could refuse. "He married you," Yara said, her voice rough and dry as rope. "He always wanted a god to ride." Cersei studied her. "You are his blood," she said. "Tell me something about him that will interest me." Yara smiled like a cut opening. "He is most himself when he thinks he's surprising you. Men like that are easier to hurt than they believe." "Everyone is easier to hurt than they believe," Cersei said. "Tell me something I can use." "He doesn't sleep much," Yara said. "He tells himself he doesn't need to. He dreams strange. He's more patient than he pretends and less loyal than he promises. He has a taste for priests because they open their mouths easily." She tilted her head. "And he's bored by women who want to be loved." Cersei felt something like laughter rise up and pressed it down with 2 fingers against her breastbone until it dissolved. "That last is obvious," she said. "What bores him is a woman who believes she must be the only weather. He enjoys storms, not skies. What he fails to grasp is that skies make storms." Yara shrugged. The chain at her wrist made a lazy chime. "Kill him," she said. "It's the only use you will get from him in the end." "Perhaps," Cersei said. "Or perhaps he will help me kill whoever tries first. That is a use too." She took in Yara's face again. The bruises faded to the color of old plums. The mouth held neutral by force of will. "You have your father's eyes," she said idly. Yara laughed then, a raw burst that made the guard shift his weight from foot to foot. He would hate that. He hated most things, but he would hate that the most. Cersei left her with water and bread and the knowledge that the queen had been to see her, which is assault of its own kind for a prisoner. Above ground, the city ticked. The wind came colder, finding the seams in shutters and the holes in talk. The bells did not ring again for a while. She had learned early that bells have less power if they are made slaves to habit. On a morning when the sky had a hardness like shell, Qyburn came to her with a folded sheet of parchment and a look of contained excitement that made him look suddenly younger and briefly harmless. "We are ready," he said. "The questions can be asked." "Where?" she asked, rising. "Out past the chain," he said. "We have a barge. It will carry the frame. The smaller device we can demonstrate from the wall." She walked with him, not quickly, letting the corridor present itself to her as if it were newly built. The keep had never felt so much like a ship. Men and material moved with purpose. Schemers adapted as rats adapt, by finding new holes, making of their cunning a service to the present instead of an investment in the future. She had always understood the way fear could be made to dance to a whistle. Now the whistle was loud and clean. On the wall, the scorpion looked like a great patient insect held down by the nails of the men who had built it. Qyburn's apprentices fussed around it with the loving practicality of midwives. The bolt lay ready. Even in daylight, the etching seemed to give off a faint chill. "Do we have a target?" Cersei asked. "A kite," Qyburn said, "shaped like a fish. There is a wind." She watched the kite rise. A painted fish with a foolish expression yanked into a sky that didn't want it. It climbed and dived, and the men holding the line laughed like boys. When it steadied, Qyburn lifted a hand. The scorpion's crew went still, the noise around them thinning until she could hear the faint music of strain. The device whispered and then coughed like a god clearing its throat. The bolt leapt. It flew awkwardly, like something too heavy to be forgiven, and then found its line and became sudden grace. It struck the fish, and the fish ceased to be fish and became paper and wind and string. A cheer went up from the men on the wall that did not need to be ordered. "That is the simple question," Qyburn said, with a small, private pleasure. "The louder one will be more interesting." The barge waited beyond the chain. The frame had been erected on it, a skeleton with a mouth. Men had wet the planks so they would not splinter if something bad happened. She liked that. The men who manned the thing did not pray aloud. "Proceed," she said. Qyburn lifted a flag. The men on the barge lifted one in answer. There was a moment of nothing, as if the city had forgotten which way to lean. Then a note began. It did not sound as she had expected a horn to sound. It entered the ear as a pressure, and only afterward did the ear remember to translate it into tone. The note grew, layered over itself, and she felt the hair on her arms prick. The water seemed to draw itself together, as if listening. The men on the barge held very still. The note stopped. The water did not answer. Then, as if from very far away, a gull fell from the air like a pocket turned inside out. It hit the river with a soft sound. The men on the wall breathed again. "That is all?" she said. "For now," Qyburn said. "The question was asked politely. And later, we will ask impolitely. Do so only when no one who cannot be replaced is standing too near," she said. "The air may have its pride too." He inclined his head. "As you command." That night she dreamed that the city was a ship and that it sailed not on water but on a dark that smelled of iron. She stood on its prow with her hands on the edges of the world and watched a pale line open at the horizon like an eye. Euron's letter reached her 3 days later. She read it after a meal of salted beef and spiced beets that had left her mouth hot and her stomach heavy. The wooden carving came tied to it with a bit of sailcloth. She turned it in her fingers, the snake and the fish, and was pleased by the knife marks the carpenter's knife had left. The thing had been made in sleep. That made it truthful. "Hold the city in a song," she repeated aloud, amused and not displeased. He believed in her in the way men believe in storms. Not with love but with expectation. It would do. She sent for the master of coin and gave him a new list. She sent for the captain of the gold cloaks and told him where to be soft and where to be iron. She sent for 3 bakers and 1 brewer and made them speak to her like lords in a hall, so that they would tell their apprentices afterward how fear had made them eloquent. She sent for a singer and told her to sing peasant songs at noble feasts and noble songs in taverns. She sent a raven to Euron that said only, "Ask your loudest question when the wind is in my favor." Winter deepened its hand, pressed the city into itself. It found its way into bones and fruit and talk. The sky lowered as if it were trying to eavesdrop. Sometimes, when she stood on the wall, she could taste snow in the back of her mouth like a story she had been told as a child and had not believed. Qyburn tested and measured and wrote until his fingers cramped. Euron burned a village and slipped his ships into a cove and listened to his men snore and did not sleep, his eyes full of the eyes of the sky. In Winterfell, Arya threaded her new needles and tested their points in the quiet. Tyrion weighed words as if they were coins that might buy him back his luck. Sansa counted bread. And Jon stood where roads narrowed and waited to learn whether duty was a collar or a gate. On a morning when snow had fallen on the city and then had decided to leave and had become a gray paste underfoot, Cersei walked alone to the room where her father had once kept his ledgers. She had had the desk rebuilt to her height. The window admitted a square of harsh, impartial light. She placed both hands flat on the wood. For a moment, with the wall so near and the ledger so heavy and the sound of frost melting into gutters outside like 1,000 small resignations, she felt the old loneliness that had walked beside her when she had been only a girl and had learned to be a queen by watching men make mistakes and pretend they were victories. The feeling passed as quickly as a shadow blown by wind. She thought of the bells, and of the sea's loud answers, and of hands that prophecy whispered about like a gossip who could never resist repeating herself. "The city learns by watching men place things in my hands," she said softly to the empty room. "Very well, I will place things in theirs. Bread, fear, songs, the shape of winter's mouth." There was a knock. A page entered, red-faced from the cold. sweat chilled on his lip. "Your Grace," he said, voice cracking with youth and speed. "A messenger from the harbor. A ship has been sighted. Not ours." She did not ask him whether he was sure. She had not survived by letting children tell her lies. "From what direction?" "The east," he said. "Small. Not flying colors we know. Fast." "Have the chain ready," she said. "Send word to Qyburn. I want the Scorpion moved to the southern wall. Not fired. Seen. If the ship runs, let it run. If it hesitates, let it hesitate." "Yes, Your Grace." The boy fled, his relief like steam in his wake. Cersei went to the wall herself. The day felt like a poorly washed dish, the smell of soap and old grease competing. The ship was indeed small and fast. She watched it skim the gray like a knife making a vein. Came in without signaling, then slowed, then sent up a flag at last, white, which could mean surrender or cleverness. She let it approach. The chain rose, the iron links weeping cold. The ship stopped obediently. A boat put off. In it, a tall man in wool and oilskin, his face lost in shadow beneath a hood. They let him climb. He came over the rail with the awkward grace of a man whose feet were used to moving under him. He pulled back his hood. His hair was a dark gray that had once been black. His eyes were the color of wood ash. He bowed. "Your Grace," he said, "from the east. From a company that once kept elephants and now keeps promises." "From the Golden Company," she said. "Harry Strickland is late." "He is delayed," the man said with the mildness that often disguised enormous pride. "But his word is not delayed. Men are not elephants, but their feet can be made to remember the way." "And you?" she asked. "Cobry," he said. "A captain." He glanced at the Scorpion and nodded with the appreciation one professional gives another. "Your preparations are handsome." "Men are not elephants," Cersei repeated softly, "but they can be taught to charge." She turned, and the day came with her. "Come, Captain Cobry, tell me what rides the sea behind you. Be honest. I have very good ears." He followed. The men on the wall looked after them and murmured as men do when something larger than themselves passes. The ship's crew watched with the impassive interest of men who had been given a story to carry and did not intend to drop it. Far out, a gull dipped, thought better of it, and rose again. By dusk the bells had rung twice more, not for marriage this time but for gathering, and the city came to heel as a well-trained dog may do even when it wants to run. Cersei stood before them and told them very little and smiled very exactly, and gave them things to say to one another when they returned to the rooms where winter had made their blankets heavier and their quarrels meaner. She told them the Golden Company sailed. She told them their queen had married the sea. She told them the North had trouble with rats in their stores and that a good city does not waste food teaching others how to eat. She told them their queen was a good city. In the night, when the wind went down to lay itself along the river, Euron stood on the deck of the Silence and listened hard enough that his teeth ached. He could not hear the question yet. He thought of the woman he had married and her mouth like a coin you wanted to bite, and of the priest who had blessed them, and of the girls he had taken, and of his father falling, and of his brother reading, and of what it feels like to decide that a prophecy is a kind of gambling and you will not put your coin on any table you have not built yourself. He smiled and did not sleep, and the sea, which did not believe in sleeping, approved of him for a little while. Beyond all of them, where the world narrowed into cold and the color had gone from it except for blue fire and black ice, a king who was not a king walked with a patience that had never known hunger. The living made their arrangements. The air gathered itself. Somewhere, in a city that had been taught a new song, the bells were quiet and a queen in a collar of gold slept with one hand curved near her throat and dreamed that somewhere a door had opened and she was already walking through it. Snow did not linger long in King's Landing, not in the parts where men's feet could make heat, where carts rutted the slush back into gray water and gutters carried it toward the Blackwater like a rumor no one wanted to keep. By the time Captain Cobry was brought through the keep, his cloak dripped only at the hem, beads gathered neatly along the stitching like coins counted twice. He followed Cersei across a chamber her father had favored for first meetings, a room of clean lines and cold glass, with a table that did not invite elbows. He took off his gloves as a mannered man does when he means to say he is not a threat. His hands were dry and well looked after, the hands of a man who trusts other men to row. When he spoke, it was with the careful balance of one who had said the wrong thing once and kept his tongue only by learning to weigh words the way a jeweler weighs stones. "Some of the company will be later than we like," he said. There were storms off Liss and more off Mere. A few captains had notions of wintering in port if port would be generous. We disabused them. Elephants are not aboard. We tried, our quartermaster tried, but shipping them in this cold would have been theater and corpses. Harry Strickland sends his regards and his apology along with his assurance that the men you paid for will arrive. They have drilled on ships enough to be nauseated and eager to stand on anything that does not move. "You have brought me men," Cersei said, as if explaining a picture to a child who might hate the artist. "Men make walls dynamic. I have walls. I will have your men. They will be paid again if they do not cost me attention. They will present their attention as if it were coin," Cobray said mildly, "and beg to change it for silver. They will not steal from a queen who counts. They will not steal more than they can carry at a run," Cersei said, "which is always less than men suppose." She moved to the window. The yard below was a diagram of purpose. Carts stacked with timber, the bones of new scorpions laid out like large dead insects, ready for resurrection. Men carrying coils of hemp that had been tarred until their palms turned black. "Your company will drill along the river first. I want them to know the smell of the air here. Men who only know clean salt cannot be trusted to understand a river's moods." Cobray joined her at a respectful angle, looking out with the polite interest of a man who had not yet decided what he would love about a city he might be asked to die for. "And of the sea? Lord Greyjoy's ships are already a rumor along your piers. Men tell me they can hear their masts knuckle in the wind at night." "They hear what they are told to hear," Cersei said. "You will not speak to my men of masts. You will ask after bread. They will think better of you." "I am not in the habit of being thought well of," Cobray said. "It has not improved my luck when it has happened." "Luck is a story men tell about the parts of their own hunger they cannot name," Cersei said. "You have more than luck. You have contracts, and the knowledge that your contracts can be burned in a hearth if the room grows cold." She left the window. "You will dine in the hall tonight, Captain. Sit where Qyburn tells you. Listen. Learn the jokes. Men forgive contracts in men who laugh at the right third cup. You like your wolves to wear bells," he said, bowing. "I will borrow a bell from your table then, and see how well it sounds in the yard." He withdrew with a soldier's economy. Cersei watched the door as if by looking hard enough you can read what will come through it next. Then she sent for the master of whisperers she did not have and the one she did. Qyburn appeared so quickly she suspected he had been waiting in the little chamber where servants once napped between rush changings. He held a roll of sketches like a physician holds a new instrument he is certain will take a man apart more cleanly than the last. "The frame is ready for the louder question," he said, excitement held like a wick between two careful fingers. "We will need a day of quiet wind. I would advise late afternoon. It seems to carry differently then." "Carry?" she said. "Like a shout down an alley," Qyburn said. "Walls and water make allies of certain sounds. I have learned which tones make gulls fall. I would like to learn which make larger things obedient." "Later," she said, "we will pick our audience. In the meantime, show Captain Cobray a device that makes him think he joined the right side of the story." She paused. "And send food to the black cells. The iron takes too much if we let it. I am not in the mood for the smell of old blood." Qyburn nodded, already half turned back to his measurements. "As you command." Her morning marched. She saw petitioners and did not grant them more than one breath of her attention per man. She let it be known that the first baker who watered the flour would be made to drink the harbor. She stood for a time in the yard and let the work pass before her, the way a queen stands for a procession, the way a general stands for an inspection. Not to be loved, but to be the surface men measure their own movements against. There was a moment in the middle of the day when the winter sun hacked at the clouds and found a loose seam. The light caught in her collar. She thought of hands. She put her fingers lightly to the gold plates and smiled without showing her teeth. Jaime's horse chose the crown of the road and he led it. The animal trusted that path the way most things do. Because it is familiar, because it is the only ground not buried in mud. He had put distance between himself and the Red Keep with a speed that would have felt like cowardice if it had felt like anything at all. He found that feeling had decided to stay behind and wait to see whether he would crawl back for it. He wore his old leathers under a heavy cloak, the white of the Kingsguard draped across saddlebags like a memory set out to air. The gold hand was hidden beneath a glove. When he stopped to water his horse at a waystream, he peeled the glove back and looked at the thing as if he had not seen it before. It gleamed even in that low winter light, fine as jewelry, vulgar as theft. He flexed the fingers and they flexed. There was a tenderness in that motion that he had not expected. Something like gratitude and something like hate, both modest enough to fit in a knuckle. By mid-afternoon, he had come to a hedgerow he knew from boyhood hunts. Only winter had made it a witch's comb. He put his horse through a gap and found himself facing a cart that had slid half off the road. Two men leaned against the wheel with the weary irony of people who know how much strength it will take and cannot help laughing at the arithmetic. A woman stood with her arms folded and her shawl too thin. Jaime dismounted and put his shoulder to the cart. The men grunted. The wheel found earth. The woman nodded at him in a way that suggested she had seen knights do less for more coin. "Where do you ride?" she asked, not unfriendly, not interested in anything but the answer. "North," he said. The word felt like bread when you have eaten too much meat. "There's only cold north," she said, "and men who talk about honor instead of bread." "I've had both," he said. "Honor's harder to chew." She looked at his horse then, and at the cloak slung over the bags. "You're a man who has eaten, though. Men who have eaten can afford to be honorable." He thought unexpectedly of Brienne's face, of the way duty had built itself in her like a plank road laid across a marsh until even a prince might cross without wetting his boots. He shook his head slightly and swung back into the saddle. "Good luck with your cart," he said. The woman laughed and said the thing people say when they do not believe in luck and do not believe in gods and know that only one of those statements will be forgiven in polite company. "And with your road," she added. "It will not get warmer." Toward evening the hedgerows thinned and the fields stretched wider, the winter making their bones plain. At a stream he stopped again and watered the horse a second time. He saw then the smoke, thin and oddly impatient. Smoke that did not sit on its own seat but kept shifting as if unwilling to commit. He tightened the girth and rode toward it at a pace that told the horse what it needed to know about the rider's courage. The inn had been a decent inn once. It had the correct number of corners and an honest door and gutters that had been cleaned before the last good man went to fight and did not come back. Now the shutters were splintered, one hanging on a single hinge like a broken jaw. Jaime could hear voices within and the wet slap of something being dragged across a plank floor. He dismounted and tied his horse loosely, as a man does who is not sure if he will need to leave quickly. He adjusted his glove. He pushed the door with his shoulder and entered as if he had been expected. For men turned as one. There is a look men share when they know they are about to do violence and hope to enjoy it. It is a hungry look, almost childish. Jaime saw then that one of the men dragged something that was not a something but a someone. An old man in a brewer's apron, kicked until his nose made the sound of a boot on rotten fruit. "No more," the old man said in the high voice of someone whose ribs had been made to learn a lesson. "I have nothing." "Everyone has something," one of the four said. He was the leader only in that his hat had a feather. "Even breath. And we will take that if you've nothing else." Jaime's hand went to his hip. It found the sword's grip like a tongue finds the hole in a tooth. The men took him in. A cloak, a horse outside, a gold glint where a glove had slipped. They smiled in a way that reminded him of other rooms, other men. He wondered briefly. He could not help it. What story they would tell afterward, if afterward came. The kind of story in which a stranger arrived and turned out to be small where he had looked large. "I recommend the door," Jaime said, not unkindly. He felt the old ease like a forgotten tune. It swings out as doors do in decent inns. If you go through it and do not return, people will speak of your wisdom. The leader laughed. Men under him laughed because laughter has its own gravity. You sound like old stories, he said. Do you have a friend outside with a bow? Yes, Jaime said cheerfully. My horse shoots very straight. That earned him a moment of confusion, then of temper. Take his glove, the leader said. The first man to move towards him was too confident. He reached with an open hand. Jaime stepped left and smacked him across the ear with the gold fist. The sound was ridiculous and satisfying, like a hammer on a kettle. The man went down gaping, his hands flying to his head as if to catch what had not yet fallen out. The second came faster, with a knife. Jaime let the knife come and twisted, brought the gold hand up under the wrist, and felt the ridiculous hand do something useful for once. The knife fell and clattered across the boards and into the old man's blood, where it looked ashamed to be wet. There are fights that are endings and fights that are punctuation. This was a comma. By the time it had become its proper part of a sentence, 3 of the 4 were holding themselves together in the patient, puzzled way that men do when they have learned that their bodies can be made to sing 3 notes at once. Pain, pain, and pain again. The 4th had left by the door with exactly the intelligence Jaime had hoped for when he first saw his feather. He looked at the old man, who had slumped against the counter and was taking careful breaths. You should close your door, Jaime said. The old man laughed and coughed and pressed his apron to his nose. I did, he said. Winter opened it for me. Jaime found a rag and pressed it into the old man's hand and poured a little water and left 2 coins on the counter. The old man looked at the coins and then at Jaime's face as if reading a thing through another thing. Where do you ride? He asked, because that is what men ask those who have left their own hearth. North, Jaime said again. Everyone who leaves says that, the old man said. Or south, if they have family they want to apologize to before the gods apologize for them. You have the look of a man who is riding toward the thing that made him. Perhaps I am, Jaime said and left. Night came down like a lid. He did not camp. He rode until the horse's breath smoked harder than his own, and then he walked and led the animal by the reins. He was not far from the old bridge when he saw the figure ahead at the ford, huge and unmistakable even at a distance. A woman in mail, her shoulders like the idea of a fortress. He stopped. She turned. Even in the winter dark, Brienne's eyes were the color of river stones. The sight of him struck her face and did nothing to it. She did not look surprised. She looked exactly as she had when he had first seen her. Like a task a man would be made better by doing, if he lived through it. You, she said. It was not a question. Me, he said. He found that his throat hurt and only then realized he had not spoken to anyone he cared to speak to in more hours than a man should. Where do you ride? North, she said. Sansa sent for me. Winter has sent for everyone. He nodded. He did not dismount. He did not go closer. There was a feeling in the air like the feeling in a room where someone has said a true thing and no one wants to be the first to touch it. The river made a sound around stones. I left, he said, as if it were something he had not done and was curious to hear himself accused of. I did not wait for anyone to bless the act. I do not know if that improves it. It makes it yours, Brienne said. Her face altered then, a very small amount, a thaw rather than a smile. And you look less like a man walking with a knife in his own ribs. I felt more like a man who had once trained with a sword and was now unarmed, he said, flexing the gold hand, making a small joke of it because the other option was to howl. Will you ride with me, or will I ride with you? We will ride together, she said. It will confuse bandits and gods, and I am tired of both. They found a place by a stand of leafless trees and built a mean little fire in a hollow where the wind couldn't bully it, the kind of fire that makes you more aware of cold than warm. He watched her hands as she fed it. Square, burn-scarred, competent. He felt something like envy for the first time in years. He had been envied all his life. He had not often envied. It will not be an easy north, she said, as if continuing a conversation begun weeks ago. There are men along the road already telling stories about ships in the fog with eyes painted on them and no sound from the decks. They will keep closer to their fires now. They will share fewer stories when they count their bread. Euron, Jaime said. The name made a taste in his mouth he did not care for. He will keep a song going in the south for as long as he can and hope the north runs out of breath first. And in the middle? Brienne asked softly. Where the river folk live and do not know which fear to honor. I wonder how many will be asked to choose between freezing and burning and whether the choice will matter in the end. It matters, he said, and knew that he believed it, and knew that belief would make a fool of him again, and knew that he did not mind being a fool if the thing that made him one had the face it had once had in a lion litter in the rain. He looked at Brienne and saw that she had understood all of that or enough of it, and would not tell him so in any words he would later try to cut from his memory. They slept in shifts and in the morning rode north with their saddles whitening and their breath making the small, steady ghosts that reassure men who fear the larger kind. At Winterfell, the ravens nested like anxious thoughts under the eaves. Sansa stood with Davos on the wall and watched men practice at spear and bow and the simple art of not panicking when a horse bites your shoulder out of boredom. Davos squinted against the cold. The wind did not care to go around him, and he did not ask it to. White Harbor sent word, Sansa said. Euron's raiders are not landing in force. They burn a boat here and a dock there and vanish like men who prefer myths to weather. There will be rumors and songs about ghosts in the fog by spring. If we live to hear them, they will be useful. If not, it will be the dead who hum them, and I doubt their pitch. Davos smiled with only half his mouth. You've the right head for winter, my lady. It's a miser's season. Men who spend too much hope early have nothing left to buy luck with. I do not buy luck, Sansa said. I invest in habits. Men who have eaten at the same time every day of their lives panic more slowly. Arya drifted along the walkway the way a cat does when it wants to be noticed and not touched. She had Gendry's heavy gloves tucked into her belt, the leather stained and honest. She nodded at Davos as one fighter nods at another, then set her elbows on the parapet beside Sansa and looked without ceremony at the yard below. Gendry says your men swing their hammers like they're trying to impress girls, she said. He says you have to show them how to make the hammer do the work. He says half of them will have to be made to stop trying to show off before they learn anything. I told him to stop being polite about it. He said you were the one to speak to. Sansa glanced at Davos, whose expression had done that thing old seamen's faces do where a smile becomes a map of all the ports they have lost and found. Men don't like being told not to show off, she said. Arya smiled without softness. Then we will show them a thing more worth showing off. Jon came up steps 2 at a time, snow shaken from his hair. Dothraki slipped in his wake like breath made flesh, their eyes on the sky in spite of the fact that the sky could not do them much harm if it wanted. He bowed his head to Sansa and then lowered his voice the way men do when they do not want to be seen to be pleading with their own blood. The last hearth, he said. We go now. The scouts found tracks that are wrong. We should have ridden yesterday. He bit the word we until it became he and then let it become we again. Daenerys appeared behind him, hair coiled, face set. She had learned to look like a queen in the north by not mourning the things that coats and collars did to her beauty. Beauty is a tool to be sharpened for the right wood. She had learned winter's grain. The dragons will stay, she said before Sansa could ask. They burn fast and the wood left to us does not. I will not make a pyre of our walls to warm my pride. I will come on foot and on a horse like a woman who understands that the sky can be closed. Tyrion had shadowed her without meaning to. He had learned the art of being unobtrusive in a court where being noticed could be a kind of death. He looked up at the 4 of them and felt again the sick comfort of being the least necessary cleverness in a room where the weather had decided most of the policy. Cersei will not aid us, he said. She will learn to make soup from rumor and feed it to her people. She has married herself to a man who thinks laughter keeps the cold off. We will let her laugh. It will sound like glass before long. Glass cuts, Sansa said. We will treat it with respect as long as it clatters against our gate only in stories. They went down to the yard, to the horses, to the tools they could use and those they could not but carried anyway, because men will always find reason to carry a thing they have made if only to feel themselves still making. Jon took the lead of the column that would ride to the last hearth. He did not look back at the dragons where they hunched on the far side of the yard like thumbed-at statues in a summer palace. He did not like to think of statues. He preferred doorways. The road north was a thing you feel in your teeth. The cold found the seams in you and learned them with an obstinacy that would have been admirable if it were not intimate. They rode in a silence that had nothing to do with the wind. When they passed small holdings, they saw the signs they had expected. Doors barred from within, smoke thinner than it should be, in some places no smoke at all. There was a smell like iron and memory. By the time the last hearth rose, its dark hulk bitten into the sky, snow had begun to fall. Not prettily, not in flakes that catch like lace, but in little mean bits that sting cheeks and melt quickly into cowardly rivulets. Jon called a halt and sent men forward. Time passed that tasted like old bread. They found the first bodies in the lower bailey. The dead lay as if they had been running until their feet decided to be honest about the math. A boy of 10 with his hands full of kindling, a woman holding a pot with a broken ear, a man who had tried to climb a wall with his boots on. There were no marks on their throats. There were marks everywhere else. The doors stood open. A wind moved through the place as if measuring it for a garment. "Inside," Jon said. His voice made no more sound than it needed to. Inside was worse. The dead had been arranged. There is a style to certain deaths. Men who have cut many throats cannot help but draw a pattern eventually. The courtyard in the center of the keep had been made into a wheel. Limbs placed as spokes, the bodies pinned with iron nails to the planks of the old stable doors wrenched from their hinges. A child's face stared out from the center of the wheel, eyes bright because the cold had risen in him and frozen the liquid there into something like gem. No one spoke. A man said a prayer in the voice a man uses when he cannot help asking a god for a favor in spite of past disappointments. Arya moved closer than anyone else wanted to. She looked at the wheel with a look so intent it made Tyrion think of men marking cards. She did not step inside the circle. She is not a fool, he thought, and was glad of a thought that did not make him feel older. "Burn it," Jon said. "Everything. And then send men to the farms, to the holdfasts. Bring the living in. Anyone too sick to ride will be carried. We will not leave bread for the dead to eat." The first torch touched, and the grease of living went into the fire the way it does when you burn anything that once held breath. The wheel became an idea and then ash. Snow fell into it and made a paste that looked like truths men don't want and put aside to think about later. Jon stood and watched until the last spoke fell. He did not look like a king or a bastard or a lover. He looked like a man who had learned a trick about time and was afraid it would not work again. They set a watch and took what food had been left by men with a sense of what they had not kept for long. Jon found a room with a bed that had been stripped to the mattress and slept there, on the straw, with ghost curled like a question mark near the door. In the night, something touched the walls with a finger. He did not dream. He woke at dawn with ice in his hair where his breath had made a frost and felt old. Euron did not feel old. He felt very young and very certain. He had burned a fishing hamlet that had never been on any lord's map and then had given a sack of barley to a woman with 3 children because he was not a monster, or at least he liked to tell himself that monsters were less fun than men who could choose a story. He did not sleep, and when he did his sleep was busy with eyes and with the feeling of standing somewhere high and watching a black river turn a corner and not return. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed himself. He liked that he was the sort of man who could notice he was enjoying himself and not pretend that the enjoyment diminished him. On the 5th night after the little fog-bound raid at White Harbor, he took the silence in close to a cliff where caves had taught men to steal gulls' eggs and hope. The priest with the pale hands came onto the deck at last. His mouth set as if it hurt him to chew something that was not prayer. "I could bless you," the priest said, as if making a joke he knew would fail and would make him feel alive for the time it took to fail. "You could," Euron said, "or you could bless the horn." "It is not a horn," the priest said. "It is a thing that pretends to be a horn the way a woman pretends to be asleep when you come to her and she does not want to be awake."
Euron Loghead,
He liked the priest more when the man was offensive. Unoffensive priests were like lanterns that let you think you were seeing something when all they were showing you was their own light. He went below and unwrapped the thing again. The metal banded strangely, the inscribed lines repeating in a sequence that looked like the ribs of a fish that had swallowed itself. He had blown it once and bled for a night from both ears and dreamed of ash falling up. He had decided not to blow it again until the air around him was full of the right kind of attention. He liked attention. He was good at it. The sea provided. The queen provided more. He thought of Cersei then, her mouth, her collar, the way she had taken him in with her eyes as if hating and wanting were the same muscle and hers was the strongest anyone had ever taught to flex. He wanted to make the air speak for her. He wanted to make the sky behave. He ran a thumb along the horn's lip and felt a heat that had no business being there in that cold. He smiled and told the sea a story about a man who had married a woman who had married a city, and about how three-way marriages are only difficult when the bed is small. In King's Landing, Qyburn made the men rehearse silence as part of the test. Silence is a discipline. It makes other noises more honest. The barge was moved to a new position. The frame had been rebuilt with more grace. Cersei took the wall with Qobri and a selection of lords who wore their fur with the uncertainty of southern men learning to wear winter honestly for the first time. Men make faces when they don't understand something, Qobri said conversationally, watching the crew settle. I watch for faces. They tell me whether my own fear is useful or wasteful. I will decide which to employ after I have seen your question asked. You will employ fear only in the men you command, Cersei said. In yourself you will employ boredom. It is less contagious. He smiled. Qyburn lifted a hand. The barge answered with a slow raising of some hidden lung. When the note came, it came lower, a pressure more than a sound, and the hairs along Cersei's arms stood even beneath the velvet of her sleeves. There was a moment when the river itself seemed to choose not to ripple. The gulls fell again, not as dramatically as a song would have it, but with a horrible matter-of-factness, as if they had simply remembered an appointment elsewhere and gone down to meet it. Again, Cersei said. Her voice came calm. There was a small harp string quiver in her throat she could feel with her own hand. No one else would. Qyburn signaled. The barge adjusted. The note shifted, no more pressure this time, more a slice. She did not like it. Men at the wall made small noises without meaning to. A glass lantern hanging from a nail in the tower stair cracked with neat politeness. Qobri watched all this as if he were deciding whether he would give up dice in favor of a better vice. Useful, he said. At a distance of how much? We are measuring, Qyburn said, eyes bright. Distance is a body also. You learn its limbs. It loses interest beyond a certain length. But within a city's reach, I can make it stay and listen. And to what will you make it listen? Qobri asked. To the unkindness we need, Qyburn said. Cersei did not clap, but she felt like clapping, the way a woman does when her baby breathes again and she can pretend it never stopped. Build the fixed frames along the river, she said. We will have them ready before spring thinks of lying to us. I want a man ready to turn the wind into a weapon in less time than it takes a boy to spill soup. She turned and saw the faces of her lords, and for a moment they were all children at a fair, which disgusted her and reassured her in equal measure. She gave them bread from her own hand after that and watched them take it with the look of people who expect a trick. She preferred that. Word of the devices ran through the city the way smoke finds rafters. Someone said the queen had found a way to make the air bend. Someone said the queen had learned the language of dragons. Someone said the queen had sold a promise to the drowned god and bought a horn that could call storms to heal. A boy at the docks said he had heard the air say a word that sounded like mother and then had bitten his own tongue until it bled. The boy's mother slapped him and crossed herself and went to the baker to see whether she could get an extra loaf for a story. Theon Greyjoy stood before the fire in Winterfell's great hall with his hands held out too near the heat and his face held too still. He had recovered a man's posture, but sometimes the ghosts of his old stances returned and moved his shoulders like a puppeteer who had forgotten to quit. He had waited to speak because he feared the sound his own voice would make when it asked. "Let me go," he said to Sansa. "Let me try." He will keep her alive because his cruelty wants an audience and because his vanity likes the shape of pity. He will have tucked her away in his ship's belly like a coin he intends to show to friends when the wine is just right. I can steal that coin. Sansa's face did not change. She had a care for him now that had nothing to do with hope. It was built of shared rooms and shared fires and the knowledge of what men can be made to endure and still be useful. "And if you die?" she asked, not unkindly, the way a banker asks about an investment. "Then I will die trying," Theon said, and heard how poor a coin that was. "And it will mean something, and she will know it, if it reaches her somehow." He looked down at his hands. "I do not have many meanings left. I am greedy to spend them all in this one place." Jon heard him from the stair and came to listen, silent, with that listening that makes men keep talking because they feel heard even when they wish they did not. Daenerys stood a little apart, eyebrows drawn, mouth carefully neutral. The way a woman looks at a man who reminds her of a piece of herself she did not lay aside so much as misplace for a time. Davos cleared his throat. "A small ship," he said, "crewed by men who know what silence is when silence is necessary. You cannot come in as if you are a storm. You must come in like fog, and you will need a trick to make their eyes wrong for a minute." "The trick," Sansa said, "is that I will say yes." She turned to Theon. "If you bring her back, I will forgive you everything I have not already. If you fail and die, I will mourn you in front of people who will believe me. That is more than I would do for most." Theon nodded jerkily and swallowed a sound. Jon put a hand on his shoulder with the blunt warmth of a man who has learned to touch men as if they were his brothers and not his rivals. "Bring her home," he said. "Home," Theon said, and the word did something to his spine, pulled it up straighter, put a bit of iron in his neck again. He bowed, badly, honestly, and left to gather the fog. Brienne and Jaime reached a holdfast where the walls had not crumbled yet, and the old woman at the gate looked at them with the narrow intelligence of a raven. "You ride together," she said. "What have you done wrong?" "Everything," Brienne said politely. "And a little right." The old woman snorted. "Come in, then, and warm yourselves. It is a pleasure to feed sinners who admit it." Inside the room that had once been meant for seed corn, there was a little heat and a little soup and a boy who kept staring at Jaime's gold hand as if it were a lantern he could put oil in. A dog slept with one eye open. Men muttered over dice made from knuckles polished by boredom. Winter makes men small. It is only the law that keeps them from becoming mean. Jaime could feel the law stretching thin in him. He found himself wanting suddenly to tell the old woman who he was and what he had done and to ask for absolution in the form of an extra bowl of soup. He did not. He ate, and when he was done he thanked her with a coin and with the courtesy a knight can still give when he has lost his banners. "Where do you ride?" the old woman asked, because every mouth in winter and every road in war has learned to ask. "North," Brienne said. "Then drink this," the old woman said, and handed her a small cup of something that smelled of rosemary and debt. "It will keep your courage from freezing too high up to be useful." They left in the gray that becomes day when the sun decides work is not worth starting. The road ran like a scar across the land. The wind made a low sound like a big animal's breath when it is not asleep but not yet hunting. Jaime looked at Brienne and tried to imagine a time after, a time with seasons that were not war. He could not. He found that oddly freeing. It meant he could do the next thing without making a plan for the season after. Euron's small ships bit at Flint's finger and carried away 2 sheep and a story. He sent a message to Cersei with a courier who had learned to run on moving decks without looking down. A scrap of sailcloth with a drawing cut into it with a knife, circles within circles, a crude wheel with a tail. The courier was to tell no one what it was. The courier was to say only, "He asks when you wish the heir to answer impolitely." The courier reached King's Landing with his fingers blue and his eyes older than his face. Qyburn took the scrap and laid it on the table and smoothed it with the reverence usually reserved for maps and saints' bones. "He can make it louder," he said. "He can make any noise louder," Cersei said, amused and not displeased. "Men mistake volume for proof." She tapped the cloth. "We will ask this question when the Golden Company marches within our walls, and when the lords are watching, and when word is sure to run to Dragonstone before the next tide. I do not despise the gods, Qyburn. I simply prefer the crowd. And if the heir disobeys? Qyburn asked delicately. He had learned to ask such a thing as one asks a woman whether she wishes another round of wine, in a tone that implies yes, and that no is a pleasant possibility. Then we will teach it again, Cersei said, looking toward the window as if she could see the river rehearse obedience. And again, and we will ask the question in a different key. And if it will not learn by ear, we will cut it until it learns by fear. In the kitchens, bakers cursed gently at dough that refused to rise because of the cold and told stories under their breath about a queen who had married a sea and taught the heir new tricks. In the black cells, Yara held her head up and learned the precise creak of the hinge on her door and the way the guard's step changed when he had been given soup instead of bread. She measured time in the itch of the wounds where her hair had been pulled and in the way she could no longer smell her own blood because Stone had taught her nose other things to pay for. She had not asked for him. She did not expect him. She sat with her hand around the iron ring at her wrist and counted the grooves in it until her finger learned them well enough that she could stop counting. When the door opened and a man came in who stood just barely too close and smiled the wrong sort of smile, she did not flinch. She refused him her flinch as tax. When the door opened again and did not close quickly and she felt a draft and a hand that knew how to move without asking the chain for permission, she still did not let her face change. The man put a finger to his lips and then took the chain in his hand and twisted it once, twice, 3 times. The iron ring around her wrist fell in 2 neat halves as if it had decided at last to be reasonable. The man smelled of fear that had been heated and cooled many times and had become something more useful. Resolve. He put his mouth to her ear and said, "Sister." He did not say her name. He did not have to. She said his name anyway because some debts are paid only with certain coins. "Theon," she said. The word made a line in the air she might cut along. She stood. They left. The guard snored. The corridor had learned silence from the devices above and passed it along now like a shared loaf. On the stair, a rat ran between her feet and told her something about the smell of the night. She put the information where she kept such things. The door at the top was the wrong door. Theon cussed softly and turned and took the other stair that led not out into the yard but into a narrow corridor that ran behind the wine cellar. She permitted herself the smallest nod. He had remembered something useful with the part of him that had not been a dog. They came up under the eaves only to find the winter sky too bright for a night like this to be kind to them. Men in the yard stamped their feet and pissed steam against the wall and said the filth things men say when they are bored and need to convince themselves they are alive. Theon counted them without moving his lips. Yara stood too still. They moved when a laugh came from the far end of the yard. They were shadows pressed into other shadows, and when a dog lifted its head briefly, it decided they were the sort of shadow that had no smell and went back to its dream. At the postern, Theon produced a key from a place no guard had thought to search because no guard had thought a man would swallow a key in daylight and keep it in his gut long enough to bring it up quietly later in the dark. He opened the door. They were in the cold then, honest cold, the kind you can only learn to love by living. They ran. Running in winter makes you aware of your lungs. It makes your lungs aware of you. They made it to the river wall and over it without any poetry at all, only the wet thud of boots and the gasp of men and women who insist on one more breath and get it. The boat waiting for them had been painted with ash and lies. It slid under the chain thanks to a tide Theon had waited for with a timing that made him, briefly, the man he might have been if the world had not bent him into other shapes. They made the river as a raven passed above them like a mistake in the sky. They did not look up. Men who look up in escapes find gods and forget ropes. On the barge the next day, Qyburn blew the note again, polite, impolite, and the river listened until it grew bored and then listened again when he made the sound change the way a woman changes the story if the child at her knee is drifting toward sleep and she prefers him awake. Cersei watched and thought of Euron's scrap with circles and of the sound of bells and of the sound of a child's breath when it is no longer his but the winter's. She thought of prophecy and of the word Valonqar and let it be one of many words to her today, because she had learned how to refuse the favor fear asks of her when it wants the stage to itself. In the afternoon she took Captain Cobray to meet a piece of the Golden Company that had arrived in the night. a block of 400 men whose boots hit the yard as if they had practiced making the sound of a coin dropping into a chest. Their commander, a man with a number of scars that had not been granted honor by the men who gave them, bowed and did not ask to be allowed to kiss her hand. He looked like a field that had learned to grow nothing and became thereby an honest place. "You will be stationed along the river," Cersei said. "You will eat at my tables, and you will behave with a courtesy that makes my people believe you are mine. If you are not mine, you will be dead before your feet learn the rhythm of my city's stairs." The commander smiled as if she had complimented his mother. "We did not bring elephants," he said. "We thought you might prefer not to have corpses you loved too much to throw into the river." "I never love anything I cannot throw into a river," Cersei said, which made a few men cough and one man laugh and Cobry glance at her with the respect one gives a fencer who has found a gap in your guard you did not know you had. That night, the demonstration. Bonfires like coins scattered along the river's dark table. The Golden Company stood in fresh-laundered cloaks, and the lords stood in furs that did not quite fit yet, and the small folk gathered beyond the lower wall in a quiet press, a creature with a single breath. Cersei stood on the wall with Qyburn at her left and Euron absent and therefore present in the way absent men can be when their absence has been arranged to be part of the show. Qyburn raised his hand. The barge waited in the exact position he had chosen on a map, in the exact position the tide had agreed to be in tonight. The note came. It drilled its hollow needle through the fabric of the night. It set the fire's flames to a small, eager shiver. Men shifted, involuntary, hands rising to throats, to ears, to the places where noise becomes part of you whether you invited it or not. "Again," Cersei said when the murmur began to be one she did not like. The second note slid like a knife through fat. It was an ugly sound but not a weapon in itself. The third, Qyburn's private triumph, did not sound at all the way a sound usually sounds. It made the city forget itself for a breath. Down along the lower wall, a line of rats poured out from beneath the stones and ran in a perfect ribbon toward the river and into it, as if a pipe were playing and had not bothered to ask for applause. People made noises then, foolish human noises that make other animals look at us with disdain. The rats swam badly and drowned quickly. The river took them the way it takes everything, without judgment, with complete efficiency. When the noise ended, there was a silence thick and greasy. Cersei lifted her hand and the silence learned to rise. She looked out over the heads of men and paused the exact moment she knew a crowd can be made to hold its breath without resenting it. "The North has winter and walls," she said. "We have a river and a queen who has married it. We have a sea that answers. We have bread. We have discipline." She made her voice softer then, a tone made for kitchens. "We have our children. We will keep them." The cheer when it came was not as loud as men would have made it in summer. That pleased her. She did not want summer back. Winter gave her an honesty she had missed. She raised a cup and drank to them and kept her face still. In the night afterward, alone except for the guards who did not count and the sense of her city under her like a bedfellow who breathed in time with her without yet being loved, she slept and woke and slept again, and at one waking she thought she heard a horn across the water in a key that was not Qyburn's. She went to the window and looked and saw the harbor, a single black thought. She did not see a ship. She did not need to. She went back to bed. She lay on her back with her hands folded on her stomach like a woman who knows she will one day be laid out the same way and would like to practice it in order to surprise no one. Then she turned on her side and closed her eyes and smiled. Light in Winterfell was at the mercy of weather and of choices made in the kitchens at dawn. Sansa walked those corridors with Tyrion at her shoulder and found that the people she passed looked as if they had been measured for hardship and found to be a good fit. In the yard Gendry had the men slamming hammers not at iron but at posts sunk into the ground, teaching them the stupidity of alarm and the generosity of control. Bran sat in his chair and turned his head as if he had heard something for rooms away and it had only now reached his ear. Arya ghosted and did not announce herself even to her own. "Your sister is happier with an enemy than with a lover," Tyrion said to Sansa in a voice that had learned to say dangerous things as if they were recipes. "She becomes herself when she has something to hate. I do not say this because I fear for you. I say it because I refuse to believe that is a life." Sansa stopped and turned and looked at him with that quality she had learned which made men think of absent fathers unexpectedly. "And you?" she asked. "Do you become yourself when you are loved?" "Gods no," he said and grinned. "I become insufferable. That is why I should be loved only rarely and by the right sort of woman." "Who is the right sort?" she asked dryly. "The sort who loves me for my worst reasons," he said. "I am superb at inspiring that." She almost smiled, then didn't. "Cersei will show her trick soon," she said. "She will call it honor if she can make it rhyme with survival. We will keep our mouths from watering. We will not let our men's ears be taught to love her song. We will make our own noise." "What noise?" Tyrion asked. "Work," she said. "The sound work makes when it does not have to be told twice. And children crying because it will remind us of what we owe them. And steel at the right time, not for show. And silence. We will use silence the way she does, but we will make it kinder. In the gods would Jon stood at the weirwood and did not pray. He did not know how. He said the names of men who had died for him and did not ask the tree to do anything with the names. Ghost lay at his feet and breathed that warm, steady breath that is a better answer than most prayers earn. Daenerys came and stood a few paces away and did not speak first. He was grateful to her for that. He had known queens who could not bear not to fill a quiet. "They have made a wheel again," he said after a time. "At the last hearth. We burned it. It will not matter. They are not wheels that burn. They are lessons. Lessons can be unlearned," she said. "Not theirs," he said, and then surprised himself by reaching for her hand and being angry at himself for the surprise. He took it. Her fingers were cold and then, in his, less so. The gods would listen without interest, which is perhaps the only decency the gods can offer. To let men speak as if they do not have to be heard to be true. "They will come soon," he said. "Faster than we can eat. Faster than we can warm our beds. Then we will be ready sooner than we would like," she said. "And a little later than would be kind." She squeezed his hand. "You will stand where you must. I will stand where I can be seen. They will hate me or not. It will not matter if they fight." He turned to look at her and saw a woman who had taken the shape of many other women to get to this place and had found that this shape hurt the least. "I do not know how to be both king and lover," he said. "You know how to be cold and warm," she said. "That is all the knowledge required." She leaned forward and rested her forehead briefly against his. Not a kiss, something else, an exchange of breath. They stood like that until a raven calling outside the gods would made a note like a rusty hinge, and they both laughed because it was that or fear. They let each other go and went to work. Euron made a circle on a piece of sailcloth and cut it with his knife. He liked circles because they made men feel as if something had purpose even when it did not. He liked telling truths to himself and then lying to other people, and then lying to himself about the truth he had told himself in the first place. It made him feel clever in ways that did not bore him. The horn lay on the table in his cabin. He did not blow it. He blew an ordinary horn instead and sent 3 boats to slip into 3 harbors and take 3 small things. A bell from a sept, a dog from a fisher's yard, a chest from a merchant's house that turned out to hold only letters and a comb. He set the letters on fire and combed his hair with the comb and rang the bell. His men laughed. He did not. Laughter had its uses. He had used a lot of it lately. He meant to save some for when it would taste better. When Theon laid Yara on the planks of a friend's ship in a cove where no one respectable had gone since a respectable man had been found without his ears, he did not collapse or weep or shout. He sat down with his back to a barrel and put his head on his knees and breathed. Yara sat up after a time and took a cup of water and drank and then said, in the voice of a woman announcing an ordinary thing after a holiday, "We will take a ship." "There are none to take," Theon said, looking up and startled to find the ridiculous reality of a smile on his own mouth. "There is this one, and there is your breath, and ours." "Then we will take this one," Yara said, "and we will keep it, and we will show men how to keep breath as if it were plunder." They made south with a patience Theon had to teach himself again with every tide. Patience is a sailor's weapon. He bled a little from the mouth where the key had done business. He did not mind. Blood is only a story if it's on the inside long enough. In King's Landing, Qyburn sent boys to each ward with little pieces of leather and told them to listen to the men who work with wood and iron, to bring back words as if the words were nails and would hold a thing tight. He measured fear and found it acceptable. He measured hunger and sent a man to the riverlands with papers nailed with silver to carry orders men would obey because the orders bore a seal and the man carried a knife. Cersei sometimes stood in her old childhood room and imagined Tywin there, imagined him looking at what she had made and nodding once, grudgingly, as if she had produced a tool he had wanted and had thought her wrists too small to lift. She found that imagining did not soothe her or sharpen her as it once had. She frowned at herself for having brought a man back to life in her head just to feel that she had killed him again by her success. She preferred the living. They could be used. They could be made to sing. They could be punished for singing the wrong note. She lay with Euron the night he returned like a boy and made the bed smell like rope and iron. He told her a story about a woman he had loved only for the minute it took him to decide he had never loved her, and she told him a story about a city she had married and which had learned the shapes of her knees through the thickness of the mattress. They laughed and did not, and afterward he lay with his head in the crook of her arm, as if he were a man who could rest, and she lay with her eyes open as if closing them would hand the room over to someone else. "Do you fear the dead?" he asked, not mockingly. He had enough mockery and preferred to spend it on easier targets. "I fear betrayal," she said, "and I fear a hunger I cannot manage." "And him," Euron said lightly, "the little brother with the hands." She did not move. "Everyone is someone's little brother," she said. "If prophecy were that lazy, it would be out of work." He laughed then and rolled to his feet as if not being in bed had been the point of being in bed. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will make noise that will run to the east faster than men. We will teach the air to speak our names." "They already know mine," she said, and closed her eyes then, briefly on purpose, because sometimes you must practice trust on things that cannot harm you. Morning, and the Golden Company in the yard drilling squares, and the city at the walls watching like a theater audience in a season where the plays are all tragedies and men prefer good actors for them. Morning, and bread carts moving with guards who had learned not to strike hands but to push them back gently, the way you push a child away from a hearth. Morning, and a boy on the riverbank finding a dead rat and considering whether to sell it to a woman who boiled such things for tinctures she sold as promises. Morning, and Qyburn moving his apprentices as if arranging chess pieces on a board the gods had mistaken for a city. Morning, and at Winterfell a rider arriving with a face the color of ash and a message written with a hand that had made too many messages lately. The dead had left the last hearth fire and come in the night to a farm whose name had belonged only to the family who had built it. The rider tried to say their names and his mouth did not permit it. Jon did not make him say them again. He told the rider to eat and then to sleep in a room with a dog. Then he went to find Daenerys and Sansa and the men who would be asked to run toward a kind of cold that all their coats could not instruct their bodies how to resist. "We will not be fast enough," he said. "Speed is their ally. They do not tire." "Then we will make them slow," Sansa said. "We will make the land into a story that delays them. We will pull fence posts and leave holes only a living man will see." Tyrion rubbed his temple. "We will shoot fire at them and they will not care," he said. "We will shoot numbers at them and only then will they behave. They are not impressed by heroics. Winter rarely is. We will put men who do not need to be heroes where heroes usually stand," Davos said. "Men who hold and then move and then hold again and do not go mad trying to be in two places at once." Daenerys listened and thought of skies and of the way a dragon's wings make new weather and of how dangerous it is to believe that because you have owned a thing you can own its habits. "I will keep the dragons low," she said. "I will follow what moves. I will remember that the living are stupid in groups. I will not let dragons become stupid because I made the group." They went about the motion that looks like preparation and is often, if men are honest, only the songs men sing to keep time with their fear. But this was work and not song. Wood was moved. Stone was spiked. Trenches were cut shallow where men with horses could leap and deep where men on foot would break ankles. Children carried straw and were made thereby to feel useful and not frightened. Women carried water and were made thereby to feel useful and not frightened. This is the way you keep a city ready. You allow it to work itself into a belief comfort will not serve. Euron stood on the river wall in King's Landing beside Cersei while Qyburn's men brought up a new frame. This one masked with carved boards to make it look less like the weapon it was. He held the horn in both hands and did not lift it. He looked down at the people below and found himself wanting their attention not because he loved them but because attention is delicious. He glanced at Cersei and felt the same thing a little and decided to tell her so later when telling her so would most amuse him. Qyburn nodded to a boy who had perfected, in the last days, the art of looking as if he were doing very little just before he did something the city would talk about. The boy pulled a cord. The frame hummed. Not an audible note, but something in the bones of the wall shivered. The sound ran out along the river in a clean line. Euron lifted the horn then and blew one long, modulated note over the hum. It was not a sound men liked. It was not a sound men could say they hated. It was the sound you hear in a dream when a door opens and you know you have not invited the guest and cannot recall a time before the house was yours. Men along the lower wall put their hands to their ears and then realized that their hands could not help them and took them away again. Embarrassed. The river stayed itself. The sky did nothing dramatic. Qyburn smiled, the smile of a man who hears an equation balancing. Enough, Cersei said. Exactly when it would feel to the crowd like proof and not like overreach. Euron lowered the horn with a little flourish that he felt Cersei ignore and loved her for ignoring. The Golden Company stood and did not look at one another and did not shift. Cobri's mouth twitched and then did not. The small folk murmured and used words they would later swear had been different. That night, ravens went out. They went east and north and made the sky briefly full of purpose. At Dragonstone, a man who had lost a father at the Blackwater stood on the parapet and swore at the birds and swore at the sea and then, finally, swore at his life and felt much improved. At Winterfell, a bird came to the rookery with a message for Tyrion that was only half a message, the other half being the way the 7 words were arranged. He read it and smiled and did not tell anyone. Not yet. Men need news and sometimes they also need an hour without it. Far north, where winter's hand had closed so hard that even the memory of summer had been powdered into a thing that could be blown by breath alone, the dead turned. They turned not because they had been sent a message, but because turn was what the ground under them did, and they did not disobey ground. They came south, patient, learning the map of living in reverse. Jaime and Brienne saw smoke on a morning of stupider cold than the day before. They went to it because men go to smoke. It was a farm. It had been a farm. It was a lesson. There are always lessons. A man lay with his back contorted into a penitent's shape. His hands frozen around the handle of a pan he had used as a shield and as a weapon and as a final piece of proof that he had possessed hands. Brienne dismounted and closed his eyes and said a few words she might have once learned as a child from a septa with poor teeth. Jaime kept his horse's reins in his flesh hand and let the gold one hang. He had not learned how to pray without feeling he was lying to someone. They rode on. They did not speak much. When he did speak, it was to say her name. Brienne. Yes, she said, ready as ever. I killed a king, he said, and it made me. I have been trying to kill the man it made since. You are not alone in that, she said. Men and women are full of people they want to murder. He laughed, and the sound did him some good. And you? He asked. It felt like a courtesy, an old-fashioned thing, to ask a lady a question she had not been asked often. I will kill the idea I had of a good man, she said bluntly. And then I will build a different idea. It will have more splinters. It will not fit in the hand as easily. It will be harder to love. That will make it true. At dusk they came in sight of Winterfell's smoke, dark and handsome, and Jaime had the first honest thought he had had in days. Relief that was not weighted with self-contempt. He had come north. He had not turned off to the west toward a little nameless place where a man could die conveniently of a fever and be found in spring by another man who would take his boots. He gave his name at the gate. He waited to see which old act would be played. The guard did not spit or laugh or draw. He nodded and said, Sir Jaime. Because sometimes winter makes men practical and politeness is the shortest path to warmth. They let him into the yard where children ran with buckets as seriously as soldiers and dogs threaded between legs with the same mission as men. Sansa met him at the top of the steps with a face that was courtesy and information. "Sir Jaime," she said, "you are very welcome. You are very late. You are very much yourself." He bowed as if it were a great court and she a queen who would punish too deep a bow. "Lady Stark," he said, "I am exactly as late as honor permits, which is too late." "Fortunately," she said, "we have learned to forgive men who take their time if they arrive before the dead do." Tyrion stepped out from behind her shoulder like the memory of a joke. He looked at Jaime and at Brienne and then raised his cup in salute. "King's Landing built a new toy," he said without preamble. "It will sing. It will not save them. I would like to be alive when it fails." "It will not fail at being what it is," Sansa said. "It will fail at being what their queen believes it can be." "And what is that?" Jaime asked. "A purpose," Sansa said. "Machines do not have purposes. They have users, and users have hunger. And hunger," Tyrion said soothingly, "can be managed by women who know how to bake bread, which you do, which is why I am here and not dead in a ditch 2 months ago. Do not flatter me by placing your life in my oven," Sansa said. "It's already full." The night before the first northern skirmish, Daenerys stood on the rampart and watched 1,000 little lights move below as men checked kit, checked each other's straps, checked the faces of their friends, and tried to see something there that would keep their own faces from breaking. Jon came and stood beside her, and they did not touch because touching would have been something to answer for later if later came. "You will be where?" she asked, practical, the way a woman asks whether the door should be barred or left on the latch. "At the line first," he said, "then where the line thins, then where the line buckles. I will be where men are being stupid. That is always the worst place and thus the necessary one." She nodded. "And I will be a rumor above you," she said. "Not so low that the dead can reach me, not so high that the living cannot believe in me." She looked at him. "They will believe in you more. They will believe in bread," he said, "and in each other, in the space between them. That space is thin. It must be held." He looked out toward the treeline where the dark was less dark. "Cersei married Euron," he said, as if it were not old news but a new grief. "There's a kind of sense in it. She has always fancied herself a storm. She fancies herself the coast," Daenerys said. "Everything must break upon her. I will let her believe that until I must show her what happens when the sea is patient." In the quiet hours before dawn, Qyburn walked the frames along the river and put his hand to the wood the way a man touches the neck of a nervous horse. He whispered to it nonsense that had learned to sound like prayer. He thought of the way the gulls had fallen and of the rats and of the crack in the lantern. He thought of sound and of the skull, of the meat around it that makes every man a bell. He had no need of gods in the way the maesters taught men to need them, things to explain what ignorance hates. He had need of causes and effects. When he found one, he stroked it as if it were a cat. He did not hear the boat coming because the boat had learned to be quiet in ways that cannot be taught to men after a certain age. He saw it when it was too near and thought, with a pleasure he did not feel often, "Ah, something to learn at last in this city." Theon's men had faces that had learned a different lesson than rats. They did not run toward the river. They moved along it. They put the boat under the chain with a neatness that would have made Davos proud and made a sound only once when a man's breath caught and he released it without swearing. They vanished into the reeds and then into the dark and then into the fog that had risen obligingly. The city slept through an intrusion. Cities enjoy sleeping through intrusions. It lets them pretend they never happened. By morning, Yara was on a nameless beach to the south, and Theon had the look of a man who had been given a life and did not quite know what to do with it yet. He would make something of it. He would whittle it. He would give it to his sister again, piece by piece, even when he pretended it had never been her coin in the first place. At Winterfell, the air at dawn had the metallic taste of a key held in the mouth. Men lined up. The dead did not line up. They arrived. The first of them came from the trees in a motion that felt more like disease than like an army. The horn blew, the livings, not Euron's, not Qyburn's. a simple sound that had called men to work and to bed and to fire since men first learned to shape air with wood. Jon's sword came up and down. Daenerys's dragon moved at a height that made men think of God and not of ash. Arya vanished and reappeared at odd angles and did unkindnesses with a neatness that made even men who thought they had known violence look away. Brienne stood and did not move at all for a frightening length of time, and then moved with the economy of a story that will be told many times and will not need a single exaggeration to keep listeners warm. In the south, at noon, Cersei walked the wall and listened to her city make noises that men would later swear had been music. Euron came up beside her with his smile crooked by wind. "If we are lucky," he said, "they will all die before they remember to hate us again." "If we are lucky," she said, "they will live long enough to learn how much they owe me." She put her gloved hand on the iron and felt, through the leather, the faintest tremor from the frame as a boy downriver tested a lever because he could not help himself. "If we are luckiest," she said, "we will not need luck." Euron laughed and kissed the air near her ear and leaned out over the wall and spat in the river. The spit broke apart the way all small brave gestures do when they meet water and gravity. He considered blowing the horn for pleasure then and did not. He had decided, for once, to be patient in a way that would surprise even him. At Winterfell dusk closed as if the day had been a book. The line held, the line bent, the line held. There were fires where there should not have been fires and silences where there should not have been silences. Sansa moved sacks in a cellar and counted them again and told a girl to stop crying gently and then, when the girl could not, told her to cry louder and gave her a rag for it and said, "We will use that for washing later. You have made work, which is better than noise." Tyrion wrote a thing and then another and then decided not to send either to anyone. Davos carried water and laughter and the smell of old salt. Ghost tore something apart and shook his muzzle once as if disgusted at the taste. Jon lost a glove and did not notice. Daenerys burned a line and felt a piece of herself leave and did not mourn it until later. Later did not come that night, not properly. Night stayed and made itself at home, rearranged furniture, found the dark corners, decided to remain. Men fought. Men slept where they fell and woke to someone else's breath in their ear, and did not scream because screaming had become a luxury they could not afford. Arya climbed onto a roof and lay flat and watched the sky until she could not feel her face and then laughed at herself and got up and went to work again. Because there was always work and she had become someone who preferred it. At King's Landing there was a party in a lord's townhouse where men toasted the queen and in the lower ward where men toasted someone else because they had forgotten who owed them what. There was a song someone had made yesterday about a horn that could call the dead back to their beds. It was sung badly and bought a drink for the singer. Cersei sat on the edge of the bed and combed her hair and thought of her children and did not cry. Euron lay with his arms behind his head and told her a different story each time she asked him a question and enjoyed his own inventiveness the way men enjoy mirrors. Qyburn wrote by candlelight and did not notice when the candle guttered. Cobry slept with his boots on and dreamed of elephants he had never seen and woke with the warm gratitude of a man who does not have to feed such dreams with coin. The dead did not dream. They came. The living learned their names only as they fell them, and sometimes even then not. In the morning the line would still be there, and in the south the city would still be standing, and between them a country would learn how much of it could be eaten and still move and still be called itself. The bells in King's Landing did not ring that night. Cersei had ordered them kept quiet. Bells are better when they surprise. She slept with one hand curved near her throat as always and woke once to the sense that the room had shrunk and then felt the collar and was comforted. Prophecy is a woman, she thought again, and she is easier to live with when you give her jewels. In the hour before dawn men who had thought themselves finished found that they were not. Women who had thought themselves safe found they were not. Children who had learned a new quiet made it into a bed and took it with them. The line at Winterfell turned from one kind of thing into another and did not break. The river in King's Landing listened for an order. The horn on Euron's table lay quietly, less an instrument than a threat not yet called upon. Yara Greyjoy stood at the prow of a ship that was hers again and tasted salt and thought, with a satisfaction that made her sleep well into old age when she remembered it later if later came, of her brother refusing again to be the sum of what had been taken from him. Somewhere out of sight of all of them, along a road that had not existed yesterday and would not be remembered tomorrow, a stranger walked east and did not stop. He carried nothing and wanted nothing and had nowhere to be, which is more frightening in winter than any horn. He passed a tree where a ribbon had once been tied and freed by weather, and he did not look up. He was not a god. He was what happens when men forget to shut a door and winter finds it. He walked on. The air held its breath and waited to be told whether it would be weapon or weather.